Chapter 18. The Last Waltz. Although Franz Ferdinand von Österreich-Este, nephew of the elderly Emperor Franz Joseph and heir apparent to the Habsburg thrones of Austria and Hungary, was neither consistent nor coherent in his vision of his empire's future, the pieces of his thinking did to some extent fall into place. They took on the hue of a historical mission of restoration, for, if all his political preferences and desires were gratified, it would have amounted to that. Deeply Roman Catholic and anti-Italian, he wanted to undo the unification of Italy that had been achieved under secular auspices a half-century earlier. He would have broken up the Italian state and restored papal and Austrian rule. He would have liked the Habsburg Empire to return to its position in the front row and rank at least equally with Germany in the European power equation. He would revoke Hungary's equal partnership in the dual monarchy, and instead would have returned to a central power structure in which all the other nationalities, or at least the numerous Slavs, exercised an equal limited autonomy. Finally, he would have repaired the breach with Russia that dated from the last half of the 19th century and would once again combine with the Tsar and the King of Prussia to promote the cause of monarchism and traditional values in European and world affairs, as they had, for example, in 1815 as the Holy Alliance. In the spring of 1914 the heir apparent was 50 years old. He appeared to have recovered from the illnesses that had plagued him in earlier years. He was of medium height and on the heavy side. His fierce black upturned handlebar moustache was thicker than that of the Kaiser, but it turned up a few degrees less sharply. Franz Ferdinand maintained his own para-governmental military chancellery. With the consent of the emperor, Franz Joseph had extended official recognition to it in 1908. With the aid of this personal staff, Franz Ferdinand, in the words of a recent historian, came to enjoy influence, even power, and to have a say if not a veto over the posts of War Minister or Chief of the General Staff. The Archduke took a lively interest in his country's armed forces, but his tendency, in the many international crises that erupted in his lifetime, was to draw back and avoid warfare. In this, though not in much else, he would have been the true political heir of Franz Joseph, who had seen his empire lose crucial wars and whose preference, in the international crises of the early 20th century, seemed to be for peace. Franz Joseph, as 1914 began, was 84 years old. He had ascended the throne in 1848. Most of his subjects could remember no other ruler. In his old age his image was that of a kindly older gentleman, a grandfather figure. He symbolized continuity with the past and with its values and virtues. While the night still was dark, he arose to perform his duties. He started work each day at 5 a.m. and put in 12 or more hours on the job. With the dutifulness and devotion came a certain stiffness, an unwillingness or inability to give, a lack of flexibility that seemed to characterize the arthritic Habsburg regime as a whole. Its literature suggests that frustration and repression lay behind the excessive formality of Viennese life, and that the city's most famous psychiatrist, Sigmund Freud, may not have been entirely wrong in suggesting that unacknowledged lusts, illnesses of which people were ashamed, and practices then regarded as perverse were widespread beneath the surface. Franz Joseph, the virtuous emperor, himself infected his beautiful wife with a venereal disease, and spent his life with the actress Katharina Schrott, a mistress, if that is the accurate word, whom, scrupulously, he never touched except on her shoulder. His only son, his then heir, the Crown Prince Rudolf, died together with a young ballerina of gunshot wounds that it was hard to believe were suffered, as the official version would have it, in a hunting accident. Mailing, a motion picture of the 1930s starring Charles Boyer, told a story that sounded more plausible, a suicide pact between doomed lovers whose society would never permit them to marry one another. Franz Ferdinand, a cousin who succeeded Rudolf as heir to the throne, was another royal figure who was penalized for marrying the woman he loved. Tall, dark, poor but proud, Countess Sophie Chotek von Kotkova and Wagner was employed as a lady-in-waiting in an archducal household that Franz Ferdinand visited often. It was assumed that he was courting one of the daughters of the house. Their mother was aghast to discover that this was not so, that it was a mere blind and fired Sophie, the true object of his pursuit. Franz Ferdinand proposed to marry Sophie. The emperor objected. Sophie was indeed of the ancient nobility, but her impoverished family had lacked the money to perfect their claim to be included in the list, prepared by the European powers in 1815, after the Congress of Vienna, of those eligible to marry and transmit royalty. Insisting on marrying Sophie anyway, Franz Ferdinand took her as his spouse in 1900. He was 37, she 32. Franz Ferdinand was forced to settle for a morganatic marriage, forswearing forever the right of his children to succeed to the throne, and excluding Countess Chotek, later Duchess of Hohenberg, from a position by his side at formal functions. She was banished to a relatively lowly status. Prince Alfred Montenuovo, the Imperial Lord Chamberlain, was the official in charge of court etiquette, and as such seemed to make himself her particular enemy. Emperor Franz Joseph apparently feared that once Franz Ferdinand became emperor in his turn, he would go back on his word, perhaps obtaining a papal dispensation to do so, and would make Sophie his rightful empress, upgrading the rank of their 3 children as well as putting them in line of succession to the throne. In the light of that probably justified fear, it seems all the odder that the court officials dared carry on their petty persecutions of Sophie, administering protocol in such a way as to repeatedly humiliate her in public. One day she might well have been able to pay them back. Indeed, Franz Ferdinand might have enjoyed doing so himself. The heir apparent was not likable. Few of his contemporaries had a kind word to say for him. The one thing about him that was, and remains, attractive was his love for his wife and children. When he was asked in 1913 to inspect the armed forces in Bosnia-Herzegovina in maneuvers scheduled for late June 1914, an unappealing request in some respects, one of the reasons he may have accepted was that, because of the special status of Bosnia-Herzegovina, it was in a sort of limbo while Austria and Hungary contested its ownership. Sophie would be allowed to take her place next to him during official proceedings. Ceremonies were planned in the provincial capital of Sarajevo on June 28, their wedding anniversary. It also should have been not merely noted but underlined by the Habsburg officials responsible for the planning of events that June 28, at least according to the modern Western calendar, was the anniversary of the First Battle of Kosovo, 1389, at which medieval Serbia supposedly lost its independence to the Turks. The Serbs of Bosnia-Herzegovina, restive in any event because of having been annexed by Austria, might well have been expected to take exception to a display of Austrian government on that particular date. Austrian officialdom had a reputation for efficiency belied by its record in arranging this particular trip. The electricity failed as the Archduke boarded the railroad car. Footmen hastened to light candles. Normally ill-tempered, Franz Ferdinand instead made a joke of it. It looked, he said, as though he were entering a tomb. The Archduke and his consort departed in the rain early the morning of Wednesday, June 24. They traveled from Vienna separately, by different routes, and rain followed them. Sophie arrived first at their destination, the spa of Bad Ilis, outside the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo. Franz Ferdinand came late the afternoon of Thursday, June 25. They stayed at the Hotel Borsner, which had been taken over for the duration of their stay by the authorities. Townspeople had loaned furniture and furnishings to the hotel so that it would look its best for the visitors. That evening, on the spur of the moment, the visiting couple decided to go into town, shopping. In Sarajevo they browsed along a market street where artisans made and sold their handicrafts and merchants plied their wares. They spent time in a rug shop. The crowds that followed them seemed friendly and welcoming. The following 2 days Sophie visited schools, orphanages, and churches, and Franz Ferdinand, as Inspector General, supervised war games in which one army simulated fighting another through the unending rain. As the Archduke reported to the Emperor in writing, all performed excellently. Afterwards, Franz Ferdinand invited Habsburg army and civilian officials and local dignitaries to a formal banquet at his hotel the night of Saturday, June 27, a dinner dance. It was a night to remember. The hotel served Franz Ferdinand and his guests a cream soup, then soufflés of some sort, and then trout from the local river that had been jellied. Main courses were beef, lamb, and, accounts differ, either chicken or goose, followed by asparagus, salad and sherbet, and then cheeses, desserts, ice creams, and candies. A great range of wines and spirits were served, including champagne, white wines from the Rhine, red wines from Bordeaux, Madeira, Hungarian Tokay, and, penultimately, a vin du pays, a full, rich white Zilivka from nearby Mostar, drunk just before the cognac. It was a summer night, and the windows of the Borsner's dining room were open. On the grass below, the Sarajevo Garrison Band was playing a concert of light music. Through the open windows, diners could hear the strains of Strauss's The Blue Danube, perhaps the most familiar of Viennese waltzes. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie had met in Prague, all those years ago, at a dance. Now it was at a dance that they were spending their last night together.